We actually start a new sermon series today, and we're actually in the middle of a very significant initiative. If you're on our email list, you probably received a notice yesterday that said the most pivotal Sunday in the history of our church will be today, and indeed it is, and you'll hear why. We're going to be unveiling kind of a new initiative called a campaign that we're going to invite everyone into, and it's called the For the City campaign. Go ahead and high five your neighbor and say, are you for the city? Now, before we get into kind of what this For the City campaign is all about, I thought we would start with the passage that was read earlier and to give some context over where we're going with this campaign and what it means for us today. The For the City campaign is really based on kind of this verse and this theme that we're going to be touching upon from Jeremiah chapter 29. Now, Jeremiah was a prophet who was speaking to the southern kingdom called Judah. Now, what you have to know is Jeremiah was someone who was coming to bring judgment. So he was speaking on behalf of God to bring judgment to the people of God in Judah who were not following God's ways. And so one of the repercussions that would come to the people of Judah because they were not in alignment with God was the people of Judah were now going to be carried into exile by a kingdom from the north called Babylon. And so if you can imagine then, what Jeremiah is doing is he's telling the people of God, because you're not in alignment with God, because you're not a just people, because you continue to exploit the poor and the marginalized, because of that, you're actually going to be punished and judgment will come upon you and you'll be exiled by Babylon. Now, Babylon, of course, was a people that itself was an evil empire, and yet this is what would happen. The people of Judah then would be taken to the people of Babylon, and as a result, they would suffer in judgment. Now, here's what comes to us, though, in the midst of this. So again, there's a people of God who are in judgment. They're being exiled to Babylon in a very uncomfortable liminal space where they don't know the surroundings. They're eating foods they don't know. They're with a people that they fear and that they don't want to really intermingle with. And here God is, and God gives this word to them through the prophet Jeremiah. Now check out what he says. He says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So if you can imagine, here it's these people who are feeling completely disoriented because God has sent them into an uncommon place. It says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Now look at what he says. He says, increase in number there, do not decrease. Now check out how strange this is. He says, also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Turn to your neighbor and say, peace and prosperity. That's right. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Because, pray to the Lord for it. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, look at how extraordinary this is. Because here the people of God are sent into kind of an evil, wicked territory in which they're carried into exile. And they're basically told by God, when you're in this place that feels incredibly disorienting, when you're in this place where it seems like the enemy is surrounding you, it's in that very place. I want you to build houses. I want you to plant gardens. I want you to marry. I want you to seek the peace and prosperity of where you are. Now, what's even more startling about this is check out what it says about how long they would be in exile. It says, this is what the Lord says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon or in Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. In other words, this is what God is saying. God's basically saying, your time of exile will actually be 70 years. In fact, I'm going to bring you out of exile and back to your home country. I'm going to bring you back after 70 years. Now, here's why this is so startling. Because this is what God is basically saying. In the midst of a city in which you don't want to be in, that you don't like, I want you to go into that place, and even though you're going to be there for a temporary amount of time, for 70 years, I want you to actually build houses. I want you to marry. I want you to plant gardens. I want you to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. In other words, what's so different is that God, in the midst of a people in exile, what he's telling them is, I want you to invest in the city versus consume and plunder the city. versus disregard and forget about the well-being of the city. Instead, what God is basically saying is, in the midst of exile, in the midst of an incredibly disorienting time, it's in that place I want you to invest, to build houses, to plant gardens, to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Now, here's the thing. That story, the story of God that basically says, hey, wherever you are in your journey, when you're in a place, even if it's temporarily, what I want you to do is I want you to be a person who loves your enemies. I want you to be a person who invests whatever kind of capital you have, relational capital, financial capital, to seek the peace and prosperity of a city. I want you to do this even though every part of you says, I'm only going to be here for 70 years. I'm only going to be here for 7 months. I'm only going to be here for 2 years. Now, this story is so different than perhaps the story that you and I find ourselves in. Because if you've been in the city long enough, now some of us, maybe we grew up in the city. Some of us, we moved to the city for school or for a job or whatever it is. And many of us, in some ways, and it doesn't matter how many resources you have, doesn't matter what kind of background you come from, every single one of us thinks somehow about an exit strategy. All of us have in our mind, oh, you know what? I'm only going to be here for a few years. First, I want to figure out my work situation, make as much money as I can, and I want to figure out my love situation. Like maybe I can meet that special someone, and then hopefully they'll be in alignment with me. Of course, both of us will want to move out of the city one day, and of course, we'll end up settling in a place where we can have a nice home, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, isn't this the story that so many New Yorkers find themselves in? And if you're someone, maybe you're from New York, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, I hate those kinds of people. You're at the very least, you would admit this, that even though you would have said that, you probably know someone, right, who's mentioned that kind of story, that same story, like I'm only here for a little bit. And even you who've been in the city, you're probably like, man, I wish I could somehow buy another home in Long Island or somewhere else so that I can get out of the city. I mean, isn't that the story that we tell ourselves? It's a story of consumption. It's a story of let me come into the city and plunder the city for whatever I can. If I'm here just for school, or if I'm here just for a little while I advance in my career, my number one goal is to hit every significant ramen shop in the city before I leave. I mean, isn't this true? We have this bucket list of things that we want to accomplish in the city so that we can just get through it so that one day when we leave the city, we're good. We've sowed our wild oats in the city, and now we can get on with the real stuff of life. Now, if you can imagine then how different then the mentality is that Jeremiah is talking about, that he's inviting the people of God to. He's basically saying, in a place, even though you know temporarily you're going to be here, will you invest in a city? Will you seek the peace and prosperity of the city? Now, I'll tell you, the temptation to simply plunder the city, to consume the city, that's a temptation that my wife and I and our family wrestle with all the time. How long are we going to be here? How long can we afford to be here? And you know what? What we've seen, I've lived here for 18 years, since 2001. I've seen so many people come and go. And some people who say, I'm going to be here for a long time. New York is my home. This is where it's at. And they're like, you know what, though? Rent prices increase like 2-3 times, especially if I want to stay in the city. So I'm going to move to Jersey. And I'm like, oh, Jersey. And they're like, maybe a little further out in Jersey than Jersey City, you know? Like there's always a step, like a progression that people are going through. I know that for myself, and if you've been in the city long enough, you've probably been part of this story as well. You've probably seen this story of people moving on and moving forward. Now, what's so extraordinary, though, about what Jeremiah is saying to the people of God, that what God's words to his people in the midst of exile is, hey, wherever you are right now, I want you to invest yourself. I want you to build roots. I want you to plant gardens. I want you to marry. I want you to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. The thing is, the story that we've been told in the culture that we live in, and maybe you're not even a Christian here today, but you'd probably agree that the story that we tell ourselves is look out for yourself, look out for your own self-interest, look out for your own happiness. And when you pursue those things, then everything else can kind of fall by the wayside. And so as a result, this is the story we tell ourselves. You know what? Invest yourself in the city, but not too much into your friends because they're just going to leave. Invest yourself in a church community, but not too much because after a while, they're probably going to hurt you. And as a result, what ends up happening then, if there's a story of commitment, and yet there's this story of my own individual happiness. And what ends up winning out when it comes down to commitment or happiness? And for many of us, we lie within this kind of perpetual yellow light. If you can imagine, and I've talked about this analogy when it comes to relationships, like if there's a green light in a relationship, then there's the dreadful yellow light in a relationship, then there's a red light in a relationship. So many of us, we live in this perpetual yellow. And you know what it's like to be in a relationship in a perpetual yellow, where it's kind of stop, start, you don't kind of know where things are. There's not really a commitment, but everything verbally is like, I love you, I'm committed to you. But in a distance, you're like, but man, there's millions of other single people here in the city that I want to kind of know if I can date them as well. I mean, that's like this awful period, right? This yellow light period. And the question is, and I think the issue is for many of us in the city, we're in this perpetual yellow in the city. Especially when it comes to this place. We're like, well, I kind of want to move here 2 years from now. Or I already know that I'm only going to be here for a finite period of time. So this is what I'll do. I will plunder the city. I will consume whatever I can and cross off everything on my bucket list. And I won't get too close to anyone. See, but that's not only a story that's here in New York. That's the story of the culture that we live in. Stephen Sondheim, he actually wrote a song that became a musical, and in this musical in the 1980s, it actually was off Broadway in 2012. It's a song entitled Marry Me a Little, and I think it captures so much of the essence of the culture that we live in today. This is what it says: marry me a little, love me just enough, cry but not too often, play but not too rough. Keep a tender distance so we'll both be free. That's the way it ought to be. I'm ready, marry me a little, do it with a will. Make a few demands I'm able to fulfill. Want me more than others, not exclusively though. That's the way it ought to be. I'm ready now. You can be my best friend. I can be your right arm. We'll go through a fight or two, no harm, no harm. We'll look not too deep. We'll go not too far. We won't have to give up a thing. We'll stay who we are, right? Okay then, I'm ready. I'm ready now. I mean, isn't this song so quintessential of the moment we find ourselves in culturally? Whether you're a Christian or you're not. It's the longing for significance and togetherness. But it's also but I don't want anything to infringe upon my own personal safety, comfort, and my own personal space. And as a result, I'm not going to commit myself to anything. In fact, I'll marry a little bit. And this song captures so much of the culture that we find ourselves in. And perhaps the story is the same for you today. Maybe you've come into the church, and this is what you want to do. You just want to come and consume whatever you can in the city. I don't want to put down roots because I'm not even going to be here. And that person is not, the people here are not going to be here very long. And as a result, we live in this perpetual tension. And yet, here's what Jeremiah is basically saying to the people of God. Hey, you're actually only going to be here temporarily. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to invest yourself. I want you to live for something bigger than yourself. I want you to give yourself to something more than your own happiness. To live for something bigger. Now here's the thing. All of us would agree, whether we're religious or not, that we do want to live for something bigger. How many of us say, oh yeah, I want to live for a self-centered kind of life that's purely after my own ambitions? You know, only those in finance would say it. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I love you finance people. But I mean, isn't that the story so often? Like, live for myself. This is what I do. And yet, the story of God is so different. It calls us to something more. And here's what I believe that's true about you, that's true about me, that's true of all of us. That when presented with it, if we were to just basically put it down on paper and basically say, do you want to live for your own self and your own story and for your own family? Or do you want to live for something bigger? Here's what I'm willing to guess. Is that all of us would say, I want to live for something bigger. Now, that requires a cost, though. It requires a cost. It requires sacrifice. It requires investment. And what God is basically saying, which is against every single sensibility of secular humanism, every single sensibility of evolutionary, microevolution, right? Like the idea that only the strong survive. What speaks against all of that is this idea. No. I want you to sow generously into the lives of others. Now, that is such a different story. Now, I would argue that story is a uniquely Christian one. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. Now, when we first started the church in 2012, I remember walking around Roosevelt Island where my wife and I live, and we were praying that God would lead us into a place where we could start a church that would become a church that generates movement for the city in a way that we would serve the city and want to love the city more than we love ourselves. Now, kind of in that whole history, God's done an extraordinary work. In 2014, we actually started Hope Midtown. So 2012, we started Hope Church NYC. 2014, we started Hope Midtown. Last week, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary as a church community. Yes, Elizabeth is excited about that. And everyone else is very polite. Thank you for celebrating that. Now, here's a story of what's happened over the last 7 years. We've actually planted 9 Hope churches. Now, I know that in our little church here, like some of us are like, oh yeah, it's a nice, warm little church here. We have granola bars, and sometimes we've got chocolate stuff there, which is really great. We wish we had real coffee instead of the instant, the water mix thing, but sometimes we get Starbucks if you come for service. Anyhow, so in Nigeria, we've actually had about on any given Sunday, there's probably between 2,000 to 2,500 people that gather within these Hope churches. Now, I know that in our small little church, it's kind of like, whoa, that seems like a big number. But yeah, that's kind of what we've had hundreds of people baptized and babies dedicated unto the Lord across these 9 churches. People making steps of faith from not following Jesus to following Jesus and saying they want to surrender fully to him. We've given millions away. Now, here's the thing, right? I mentioned Extending Hope. We just raised $60,000. Every single penny is going to all those causes behind us. This past spring, we had another initiative called Hope for NYC. We raised another $20,000 for that. So that's $80,000 that's going away towards all of those different causes. In addition to that, our church planning network that we started, the New City Network, we give away about $200,000 every year towards new churches that are starting new nonprofits, et cetera, all throughout the city. And so, in other words, this year alone, our church here will probably give away about $250,000 for causes outside of our church. So listen, if you're wondering, why does the sound not work sometimes? I want you to know why. It's because we're giving money away for the good of the city, to seek the peace and prosperity of the city, because we want to be a blessing to our brothers and sisters in Peru. We want to be a blessing to our brothers and sisters in Cambodia, and towards those who don't know Jesus, and towards those who are going through some extreme atrocities across the world. This is why we do what we do. Now, millions of dollars, if you can imagine, just this year, $250,000 from this congregation alone, millions of dollars have been given away to serving and helping new churches and new nonprofits. We probably have over 50 nonprofits that we've served or given to over the years. It's been unbelievable to see what God has done. In addition to that, through the New City Network, we've helped start 23 new churches in global cities, some in Amsterdam and in Los Angeles and in Montreal and in other parts of the world. It's been extraordinary to see what God has done. Now, here's the thing. I know that for us, if you sit in this pew, you're probably like, wow, that seems like way bigger than this small church that we have here. Why are we just eating pizza every week then? Well, I want you to know, we together, we've made a significant difference. And that's why week after week, I say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, because without you and your generosity, without you and wanting to live for something bigger, none of this would be possible. Without us stepping into this dream, without us stepping into this moment, without us taking on this call to build houses, to settle down. Now, some of you, you're just like, I know I'm only going to be here for 2 years. Well, guess what? You still get to be part of this story. And because you've been part of this story, I want to say thank you. You've made this difference. Which brings me to this next chapter. What does this mean for us? This For the City campaign that we're launching today, that will go for the next 6 weeks, which you'll hear about week in and week out, that we're going to invite you to participate in, to invest yourselves into this, is another call and another invitation towards greater and deeper investment into the city. Here's the short of it. Here's what's happening. There's a building that we have purchased, and it's at 109 East 31st Street on the corner of 31st and Park Avenue, right in the middle of the city. Here's a map. On this map, you can actually see Roosevelt Island. I'm just mentioning that because I live there, but no real reason, but Roosevelt Island's right there in between Queens and Manhattan. But anyhow, you can see where this building is, and the building is located right in the heart of Manhattan. Now, amazing provision allowed for us to purchase this building. A family foundation has stepped in and purchased the entire building and loaned us the money to purchase the bottom 4 floors of this building. If we can show the next slide. Here's the picture of that building. It's a 7-floor building, and again, the building has already been purchased. The bottom 4 floors now are being sold to us to own and operate this commercial space. Now, here's the gist of what's happening. The opportunity before us is to purchase this building in the middle of Manhattan where new disciples, new churches, and new kingdom ventures can be formed for years to come. Here's a project to purchase 4 floors of a 7-floor building at 109 East 31st Street for Hope Midtown to own and operate as a ministry center for the city. In other words, we will do everything that we do as a church except for Sundays, because Sundays we'll still be gathering here, worshiping and having our kids' programs on Sunday mornings. But everything that we do throughout the week for Next Generation, for new disciples, for Alpha, for Mostly Healthy Spirituality, Mostly Healthy Relationships, everything else that we do will actually be housed in this building for new disciples, new churches. Every time we've launched a new church, there's been an exorbitant cost. You wouldn't believe how much it costs to rent spaces of like 20 to 50 people. And yet we're going to have this space where new churches can gather. And our dream is for hundreds of new churches to start out of this space for generations to come. Not only that, new kingdom ventures. We hope that nonprofits and for-profits, it's going to be a co-working space we're already talking to different entrepreneurs about using this space as a place where they can co-work and create new kingdom ventures that will be a blessing to the city for the renewal of the city for years and generations to come. Now, all of this is made possible due to the generosity of this family foundation. We have purchased the building at about half the market rate of a building in this area. So we've got it for about $750 per square foot, which is nearly half in that neighborhood. Now, because of that, this family foundation has loaned us the money so that we would purchase these bottom 4 floors. Now, here's where you and I come in. Now, whether you've been here for a while, and I realize if this is your first Sunday, you're probably like, this church talks about money a lot. And sorry, but I'm not sorry, because this is an incredible opportunity to invest right where we are. Here's the invitation. We want to prayerfully invite you for our Hope congregation. Now, here's what we're looking at. We're looking for 100% participation. I know that what we've said and what we continue to say week after week is, hey, if you're new to Hope, don't feel obligated, et cetera, et cetera. But here's what we want to do. I want to say to you, if you're part of our community, even if you're still not sure if this is kind of your main thing, if you're part of our community, we want to invite you to participate in some way. Now, here's how much we're looking to raise. We're looking to raise $2 million above and beyond our normal giving over 26 months. So 4 tax years, December 2019 to January 2022. Now, here's what will happen then. On December 8th, which is 6 weeks from now, we will have a pledge Sunday where we're going to invite you to make a pledge of what you'd like to commit to giving towards this $2 million goal for this campaign. And we're going to invite you to prayerfully consider this. We're launching a website. It's called forthecitycampaign.com, and you'll receive correspondence about it. On your way out, you're going to receive a brochure that has frequently asked questions, all of the questions that you might have about financing, about the floor plans of this space, how's it going to be operated, et cetera, et cetera. All of that will be answered on this brochure and on our website, and we would love for you to prayerfully consider. You're going to get invited. In fact, every person in our church is going to be invited to a home gathering where you can hear more about the vision of what's happening and how this can truly be a blessing for years to come. So that's what's happening in this For the City campaign. Now, here's the thing. Again, I know some of you are already like, I'm not even going to be here for a long time. Or you're probably like, in fact, I already know the girl I'm going to ask out. And if she says yes, I'm going to also ask if she'd be willing to move to like San Antonio or something, you know? Sorry, I don't know where San Antonio came from. That just was like, you know, there's Disneyland there. No, is there Disney? No. There's stuff there, right? Disney, I don't know. There's something in San Antonio. San Antonio Spurs. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, well, here's what I want you to do. Like this vision. Like the word that was given to Jeremiah. Will you invest where you are? Will you invest? Not consume, Will you invest? Will you live for a bigger story? Here's the thing, many of us, we come to the city and we're like, yeah, you know what, if I had a choice, would I want to be part of a story where I can look back and say, you know what, I had a hand in what God did in this way? Or will we basically be like, oh yeah, I checked out every great pizza spot in the city. I made a Google map that it kind of outlines all these spots and stuff, and I shared it with all my friends. But that was years ago, and then I come back to the city to consume more of this. No. Wouldn't you want to be part of a bigger story than that? Now, here's the thing. So many of us, right, are probably like, wow, Drew, you're talking about this money thing, and you're trying to guilt us into that. I'm not trying to guilt anyone into this. This is an invitation, because here's what's unique about the Christian story. Because why? Why in the world would God say to the people of Judah, when you are in Babylon, seek the peace and prosperity of the city? Instead, if I were God, I'd be telling the people of Judah, hey, listen, you just got to survive for 70 years. Just make it. Stay enclosed. Don't get intoxicated with everything around you. In fact, look out for your own people. Create generational wealth for your own family. That's what I would tell them. And yet, here God is basically saying, no, I want you to invest in that stuff outside of you. Why in the world would he do that? You see, because this has been the heart of God from the beginning. And this is why it's different than the story of secular humanism. This is why it's different than the story of evolutionary kind of philosophy. Because it's not, hey, only the strong survive. It's no, I want you to invest yourself in the good of others. And where does this story come from? It comes from a story of a person named Jesus, who God himself would send his son. And this is what Paul writes to us in Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were alienated from God, while we were the enemies of God, and yet Jesus moves towards us and dies for us and gives his life on our behalf. And in so doing, he shows us another way. He shows us the way of life. Like John, who's the brother of Jesus, he actually says this, that by believing, you might have life in his name. I love that phrase. That by believing in Jesus, that we actually experience life. That by believing that the way of sacrifice, that the way of living for something bigger than myself is the way towards true life and freedom. Isn't this the story that all of us long to live into? And this is the gospel message. This is the good news. That we don't do this because we've been guilted into it or we've been shamed into it, but we do this because we're living a different story. The story of a Savior who has come to give his life away so that you might have life, so that I might have life. And what if the same story that's told about your life is a story of how you gave your life away so that others might have it? Wouldn't that be a beautiful story? Because that's the story of the gospel. That's the story of good news. Now, I want to show a picture. This is actually a picture taken in 2014. I know it's black and white and it's a little bit difficult to see, but this is actually taken at the Turtle Bay Music School, or what was formerly the Turtle Bay Music School back in 2014. Now that building, if you've walked by it, has been destroyed, right? Ben and Jenny they were there in those early. Anyone else that remembers the Turtle Bay Music School from our church? Yeah, just a smattering of hands. Turtle Bay Music School, this is where we first gathered. And if you notice, there's a group of about 20 people here praying in that space in 2014. This is taken from the summer of 2014. Deanna was there. Deanna and Ricardo are in that picture. James and Pauline are in that picture. There's a number of people who have moved on, like Jonathan Chu, who's now part of Hopi's Village, Chris and Gina, who are part of Hope Jersey City. All of these people, which is, again, the normal story, right? Is this what we do? We go, we get married, we move to Jersey City because it's the new Brooklyn, right? I've heard it all, guys. I've heard it all. But at one point, though these people have moved on, they invested, and they prayed, and they sowed. So that you and I who are sitting here, we're here because folks like Deanna and Ben and Jenny and others who from those Turtle Bay Music School days, have invested and sowed deeply into what's happened here so that we can continue to be part of the story of what God is doing. And the invitation for you and the invitation for me, and now here's the thing, I know that all sorts of fears and anxieties rise up. Like, I don't know, I'm just here for a couple of years, like I'm a student, or I don't even have any money. That's okay. What does it look like for you, for your heart, to be in a posture in such a manner in which you say, I want to live for something bigger than myself. I want to live for something bigger than my next vacation. I want to live for something bigger that will bless generations. That's the call and that's the invitation that we have for you in this For the City campaign. We're going to invite you to prayerfully consider this over the next 6 weeks. And we're going to be believing that God will do an extraordinary thing through this church. It is, if you were to ask me, did I believe that everything that's kind of arisen out of what's happened, did I believe that this would happen? No way. I thought that we would basically be pastoring a church in Astoria and Roosevelt Island, and that was it, because I love Roosevelt Island. And but here I am. Here we are. And we get to be part of a story that lives a different story than the rest of the city. Because the rest of the city will say, hey, just build generational wealth for yourself. Just pay off your own kind of stuff and continue to live for yourself. And today, I'm going to invite you to live for something bigger. These next few weeks, I'm going to invite you to live for something bigger. There's a book written by this guy named Michael Yapko. It's a book called Depression is Contagious. And in his book, one of the things that he examines is the rise of the pharmaceutical industry over the last 50 years, as well as the rise of like clinical depression. What's amazing is that in Western societies, like there are so many, the rise of clinical depression and the rise of the pharmaceutical industry addressing depression, it has grown astronomically. One of the things that he examines is like, where did this come from? Now, in his book, Depression is Contagious, as he seeks to answer that question, one of the interesting things he finds about what is one of the best ways that someone can deal with depression? Now, here's the thing. I know that for many of us, when I mention this word depression, more and more the people that I meet, and of course, statistics shows that the younger people are nowadays, depression is actually on the rise. There's something about depression and wealth. And no matter how much privilege you've been given, no matter how much material wealth you've been given, there's still this loneliness epidemic. There's still this depression epidemic that exists. You know what's fascinating is in his book, one of the things that he examined, he says, one of the best things that one can do when someone is depressed is to invest your life in helping someone else. Now, as someone who struggles with depression at times, I know that for myself, that's the last thing I want to do. When I'm depressed, this is what I want to do. I want to pull down the blinds. I want to put Netflix on or Disney Plus or invest in whatever will get my mind off of whatever I need to get my mind off of. And I don't want to talk to anyone because I don't want to be a danger to anyone. I don't want to be a bother to anyone, and nor do they want to be around me. But one of the most profound things that he talks about, which is so counterintuitive to any of us, when we're going through difficulty, is one of the best things that we can do is to actually begin to start thinking about someone or something bigger than ourselves. And you know what? That's the invitation I have for you, because that is the good news of the gospel, is that by believing in that, by believing that when we give our lives away, we can have life in his name. That is a tremendous invitation to all of us. I'm going to invite you, if you would stand with me, I'm going to invite the worship team to come forward. Here's what I want to do. I want to invite you, if you would open up your hands in a posture that we do week after week. And I want this posture to be a signal for you of just surrender of your entire life, as well as receiving from God the assurance that his deliverance will come. If you can imagine kind of your own journey in your own life, maybe the things that you hold on to, whether it's your money, whether it's your future, whether it's your love life, whether it's your children, so much that we cling to and we try to control. Our health, whatever it is, and And today, in this posture of surrender, may it be an invitation before the God of heaven and earth, the God who spins the earth's orbit, the God who feeds the furnace of the sun. That this God, he says, I've got everything in my hands, including your very life. And today, with our hands open, would we just surrender to this God and confess, God, we want you. We want you to take control. All the ways in which we try to run our own lives, all the ways in which we try to control our own destiny and secure our own future. That today would be a day where we release these things to the God of heaven and earth. That we stop playing God ourselves and that we say, God, we want you to be God. We surrender and we confess. Take what you will. Take our futures, take our finances, take everything, God. And God, may we run into your arms, the loving Savior who tells us that we are worth everything, including the life of your Son. And because of that, we can be a free people who run freely into your arms, not holding on to the things that so keep us, the trappings that so often cause us so much anxiety and depression and fear, but instead we can have a freedom that's found in the one who created everything. So God, we trust you. It's in Jesus' name.